Welcome to the Sci-Fi Rancher story. Here you find the best HFY story written by human. Listen the story. If you like it, subscribe the channel.
I accidentally married an alien girl at a galactic festival. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Rufus blinked against the blinding lights of the galactic festival. The sights and sounds overwhelming in the best way possible. He was a long way from Earth on a planet whose name he couldn't quite pronounce, Xenia. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the sheer spectacle of it all. Alien creatures of every size, shape, and color bustled around, their voices a harmonious cacophony of languages, some guttural, others musical. Stalls lined the wide streets, showcasing everything from shimmering gravity-defying fabrics to alien foods that seemed to shift colors under the starry sky. Rufus felt like a kid at a candy store, his grin wide as he sampled strange delicacies and dodged the occasional enthusiastic vendor trying to sell him what looked suspiciously like a live octopus. "This place is nuts," Rufus muttered to himself, glancing at a map on his wrist. It didn't help much. The layout of the festival seemed designed to confuse anyone who wasn't a local. He sighed, letting the flow of the crowd carry him, when a sudden burst of vibrant light caught his attention. Ahead, a group of aliens stood in a circle, chanting in rhythmic tones. At the center of the circle, a figure danced with wild abandon. Rufus couldn't tear his eyes away. The dancer was slender and graceful, her skin a kaleidoscope of colors that shifted with each movement. Blue one moment, green the next, then streaked with gold. Her long pointed ears twitched as she spun, and her laughter rang out carefree and infectious. Before Rufus could think better of it, he edged closer. The energy of the ritual seemed to draw him in, the air buzzing with an electric charge. "Come on, join us," the dancer called, her voice melodic and teasing. She grabbed his hand before he could protest, pulling him into the circle. "I think there's been a mistake," Rufus stammered, trying to resist, but her grip was firm despite her delicate appearance. "No mistake. The more the merrier," she said with a grin, her sharp teeth glinting under the festival lights. The crowd cheered, and Rufus felt a mixture of embarrassment and exhilaration as he found himself swept up in the strange dance. The movements were simple enough to follow, and he mimicked the others as best he could, though he felt clumsy next to the fluid grace of his new companion. "What's your name, Earthling?" she asked, twirling around him. "Rufus," he replied, ducking as a glowing orb passed over his head, part of the ritual's elaborate choreography. "And you, Angelica," she said, her smile widening. "Keep up, Rufus. This is the best part." The chanting grew louder, and the crowd's energy seemed to peak. Rufus felt a strange warmth spread through him, a tingling sensation that wasn't entirely unpleasant. He glanced at Angelica, who winked at him before raising her arms high. The lights around them pulsed, and a wave of golden energy enveloped the circle. The next thing Rufus knew, the crowd erupted into cheers, and Angelica turned to him with a sly expression. "Well, Rufus," she said, her voice dripping with amusement, "congratulations, you're now officially my bondmate." "Wait, what?" Rufus froze, his heart skipping a beat. Angelica's laughter rang out, and she clasped his hand in hers, holding it up for the crowd to see. "Witnessed and sealed," she declared, her tone playful, but with an edge of finality. The crowd cheered again, and Rufus felt his stomach drop. "What are you talking about, bondmate? Is this like marriage?" "Pretty much," Angelica said, looking entirely too pleased with herself. "But I didn't agree to this," Rufus protested, yanking his hand back. "You joined the dance," Angelica said with a shrug, her multicolored skin shimmering in the light. "That's as good as saying I do here on Xenthia. Don't worry, it's not so bad. I'm a great bondmate, if I do say so myself." "This has to be a joke," Rufus muttered, running a hand through his hair. "There's no way this is legal or binding, or whatever." "Oh, it's very binding," Angelica said, her grin never wavering. "But if it makes you feel better, we can talk to the council tomorrow. They're the only ones who can break a bond. In the meantime," she leaned closer, her golden eyes gleaming. "You're stuck with me, Earthling," Rufus groaned, rubbing his temples. "This can't be happening. I just wanted to see the festival, not get married to a stranger." Angelica feigned offense, placing a hand over her heart. "You want me, Rufus, but don't worry, you'll come to love me. Everyone does." "Great, Rufus." muttered, glaring at her. Just what I needed on my vacation. A cosmic prank. Come on, she said, tugging at his arm. Let's get something to eat. You're going to need your strength for tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? Rufus asked Wiley. Oh, nothing too intense, Angelica said, her tone suspiciously nonchalant. Just a little audience with the council, some pleading, maybe a few trials of compatibility trials. Relax, Rufus. I'll handle everything. You just have to stand there and look cute. Rufus sighed, realizing he was well and truly trapped in whatever bizarre situation this was. As they made their way through the festival, Angelica chattering animatedly about the best food stalls, Rufus couldn't help but wonder how he was going to survive the next 24 hours, let alone however long it took to fix this mess. But as he watched Angelica laugh and charm her way through the crowd, a small part of him couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. Rufus sat cross-legged on a cushion that was far too soft for his liking, staring at the glowing orange beverage Angelica had placed in front of him. She was perched across from him in a way that somehow managed to look both casual and elegant, her multicolored skin catching the dim light of the alien tavern they ducked into around them. Other patrons of various species chattered in languages Rufus couldn't hope to understand. So let me get this straight, Rufus began, his voice a mix of disbelief and resignation. I'm married to you because I danced in a circle. Angelica's laugh was as carefree as ever. It wasn't just any dance, Earthling. It was the Fanny bonding rite, sacred, ancient, and irrevocable, unless, of course, the council decides otherwise. Rufus groaned, dropping his head into his hands. And the council, they'll just let us undo this rite. No problem. Well, Angelica drawled, twirling a strand of her shimmering hair around her finger. It's not impossible, but it's not exactly easy either. The council takes bond seriously. If they think we're a good match, they won't break it. Great, just great. Rufus took a cautious sip of the glowing drink. It tasted like mango, cinnamon, and fizzy static electricity, which was oddly not terrible. Angelica leaned forward, resting her chin in her hands as she studied him. You're taking this better than I expected. Most people would be freaking out by now. Oh, trust me, I'm freaking out on the inside, Rufus muttered, but I figure panicking won't help. Plus, I'm still holding on to the hope that this is all some kind of elaborate practical joke. Angelica grinned. That's the spirit, though I should warn you, Xingyan jokes don't usually involve legally binding contracts. Rufus gave her a flat look, but she just laughed again, clearly enjoying his misery. He couldn't decide if she was the most annoying person he'd ever met or the most entertaining, maybe both. So, what's the plan? Rufus asked, setting his drink down. We just show up at the council tomorrow and ask nicely, sort of. Angelica said, her tone shifting to something slightly more serious. The council doesn't just undo bonds for no reason. We'll have to convince them that this was a mistake, and to do that we'll need to pass the compatibility trials. Trials as in plural. Rufus felt his stomach sink. 3 to be exact, Angelica said, holding up 3 fingers. The first is the dance of unity. You already got a preview of that. The second is the trust maze, and the third— she hesitated, her playful demeanor faltering for a moment. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Rufus frowned. You don't sound so confident about the third one. Angelica waved a hand dismissively. Oh, it's nothing to worry about. I'm sure we'll figure it out. But first we need to focus on the dance of unity. If we mess that up, the council won't even let us attempt the other trials. Fantastic. Rufus slumped back against the cushion. I'm doomed. Oh, don't be so dramatic. And Angelica said, scooting closer, you've got me on your team. Remember, I'm an excellent dancer. Yeah, but I'm not, Rufus pointed out. I've got 2 left feet, and that's on a good day. Then it's a good thing you've got a whole night to practice, Angelica said, grabbing his hands and pulling him to his feet. Wait, what now? Here, Rufus glanced around the tavern, which was still bustling with patrons. You want me to practice dancing here? Why not? Angelica said with a shrug. The best way to learn is by doing, and besides, the dance of unity isn't just about moving in sync, it's about connecting with your partner. Rufus groaned, but allowed himself to be dragged to an open space in the corner of the room. Angelica started humming a tune, her movements fluid and effortless as she began to demonstrate the steps. Okay, so it's all about rhythm, she explained, grabbing his hands and guiding him through the motions. You have to feel the music, trust your instincts, and most importantly, stop overthinking. Easier said than done, Rufus muttered, stumbling over his own feet. Angelica laughed, steadying him. Relax, Rufus. This isn't a life or death situation. Just have fun with it. I'm not sure fun is the word I'd use, Rufus said, but he forced himself to loosen up, mimicking Angelica's movements as best he could. To his surprise, it wasn't as terrible as he'd expected. Sure, he was still clumsy and awkward, but Angelica's infectious energy made it hard to stay. Frustrated, her laughter and encouragement kept him going, and by the time they finished their impromptu lesson, he was out of breath, but feeling a tiny spark of hope. Not bad, Earthling, Angelica said, patting him on the shoulder. You might just survive the dance of unity after all. High praise, Rufus said, dry, but he couldn't help smiling. Thanks. I guess don't mention it, Angelica said, her tone unusually sincere. We're in this together, whether we like it or not. All right, Angelica said, breaking the silence. We should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Rufus nodded, suddenly aware of how tired he was. Yeah, good idea. As they left the tavern and made their way to the lodging, Angelica had arranged a cozy little pod suspended in the air like a giant glowing jellyfish. Rufus couldn't help wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Married to an alien girl, facing a trio of ridiculous-sounding trials, and caught up in a culture he barely understood. It was a mess, to be sure, but as he watched Angelica chatter animatedly about festival traditions, her eyes sparkling with excitement, Rufus couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be the worst adventure he'd ever had. Rufus didn't think he could possibly be more nervous than he was. Standing at the entrance to the council hall, the grand structure loomed before him, its towering spires glowing softly in the morning light like a blend of ancient architecture and advanced technology. Alien symbols he couldn't read scrawled across the archways, and the air around the building seemed to hum with a faint otherworldly energy. Relax, Angelica said, nudging him in the side as they approached the wide steps leading up to the entrance. She was practically bouncing with energy, her usual mischievous grin plastered across her face. The council members don't bite. Well, most of them don't. Very reassuring, Rufus muttered, his stomach churning. He glanced down at himself, suddenly feeling self-conscious in his wrinkled travel clothes. Angelica, on the other hand, looked radiant, her shimmering skin catching the light in a way that was almost distracting. A pair of alien guards stood at the entrance, their tall insect-like forms clicking faintly as they inspected the two newcomers. One of them tilted its head, its multifaceted eyes narrowing as it spoke in a language Rufus didn't understand. Bonded pair here for compatibility trial, Angelica said smoothly, pulling Rufus closer and holding up the ceremonial token they'd been given at the festival. The guard made a clicking sound that Rufus could only assume was approval and stepped aside to let them pass inside. The council hall was even more impressive, the ceiling arched high above them, painted with intricate murals that seemed to shift and change as Rufus looked at them. Rows of seats lined the walls, filled with aliens of every imaginable species, all murmuring to one another in anticipation. At the center of the room was a raised platform where 5 council members sat in ornate chairs, their expressions unreadable. Well, one of the council members said as Rufus and Angelica stepped onto the platform. The speaker was a tall, willowy alien with glowing green eyes and a voice that resonated like a bell. Another pair seeking to break the sacred bond. How predictable! Angelica's grin didn't falter, though Rufus could feel the tea radiating off her counselors. We come with the utmost respect for your traditions, she said, her tone almost too sweet. But this bond was formed in error, and we humbly request the opportunity to prove our incompatibility. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from amused to skeptical. Finally, a short, rotund alien with a face like a squashed frog spoke up. Very well. The trials will determine the truth of your claim. If you fail, the bond remains intact. If you succeed, it will be dissolved. Rufus swallowed hard. And if we fail, then you will remain bound for life. The counselor said the word, sending a chill down Rufus's spine. Don't worry, Rufus, Angelica whispered, leaning close to him. We've got this. The first trial was held in a large circular chamber, the walls lined with glowing crystals that pulsed in time with a rhythmic beat. At the center of the room was a platform marked with intricate patterns, clearly designed for dancing. The dance of unity, announced a counselor, their voice echoing through the chamber. This trial tests the harmony between bonded pairs. You must move as one, attuned to each other's rhythm and intent. Begin. Angelica grabbed Rufus's hand, pulling him onto the platform. Remember what we practiced, she said, her voice low but urgent. Just follow my lead. Easier said than done, Rufus thought as the music began to play. It was unlike anything he'd ever heard, haunting and beautiful, with a rhythm that seemed to shift unpredictably. Angelica moved effortlessly, her body flowing with the music, while Rufus struggled to keep up. You're stiff, Angelica hissed, glancing over her shoulder at him. Loosen up. I'm trying, Rufus snapped, nearly tripping over his own feet. He could feel the eyes of the counselors and the crowd watching their every move, and it only made him more self-conscious. Angelica spun around him, grabbing his hands and guiding him through the steps. Stop thinking so much, she said, her tone surprisingly gentle. Just feel the music. Trust me. Trust her, right? Rufus took a deep breath, forcing himself to relax. He focused on Angelica, on the way her movements seemed to flow like water, and tried to match her rhythm. Slowly but surely he began to find his footing. The music swelled, and Angelica led him into a series of intricate spins and dips. Rufus stumbled a few times, but Angelica was always there to steady him, her touch grounding him in the moment. By the time the music reached its crescendo, Rufus was almost enjoying himself. Almost as the final notes faded away, the crowd erupted into applause. Rufus and Angelica stepped off the platform, both breathing hard but smiling. Well done, said one of the counselors, their tone grudgingly impressed. You have passed the first trial. Proceed to the next chamber. Rufus let out a sigh of relief as they left the room, his heart still pounding from the exertion. One down, two to go, he said, glancing at Angelica. That wasn't so bad. Angelica smirked. See, I told you we'd be fine. The second trial was held in a labyrinthine maze, its walls made of a strange shimmering material that seemed to shift and ripple like liquid. The air was thick with a faint, sweet-smelling mist, and Rufus could barely see more than a few feet in front of him. This is the trust maze, a counselor explained. One of you will lead, the other will follow. The leader must guide their partner through the maze without the use of sight. Only by relying on your bond will you find the way. Rufus stared at the maze, his stomach twisting with unease. You've got to be kidding me. Angelica gave him a reassuring pat on the back. Relax, Rufus. I've got this. Before he could argue, a blindfold was placed over his eyes. Darkness enveloped him, and he felt Angelica take his hand. Just trust me, she said, her voice steady and confident. Rufus nodded, gripping her hand tightly as she led him into the maze. The floor beneath his feet felt uneven, and the strange mist made it hard to breathe. But he focused on Angelica's voice, letting her guide him. Step to the left, she said. Careful, there's a dip here. Despite his initial nerves, Rufus found himself relaxing as they moved deeper into the maze. Angelica's instructions were clear and precise, and he began to trust her instincts more than his own. When they finally emerged from the maze, Rufus pulled off the blindfold, blinking against the light. Two trials passed, the counselor announced, their tone begrudging. You may proceed to the final challenge. Rufus turned to Angelica, his chest swelling with a mix of relief and gratitude. You were amazing back there. Angelica grinned, her eyes sparkling. Told you I'd take care of you. As they walked toward the final chamber, Rufus couldn't help but feel a growing sense of admiration for his accidental bondmate. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to pull this off. After all, the door to the final chamber slid open with a low hum, revealing a circular room bathed in soft golden light. The air felt heavier here, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of Rufus's neck stand on end. He glanced at Angelica, who for the first time looked unsure of herself. So Rufus said, attempting to break the tension, what's behind door number 3? More dancing, a trivia contest? Angelica didn't laugh. Instead, she pursed her lips and took a deep breath. The final trial is different. How different? Rufus pressed, feeling his stomach tighten. It's called the bond of hearts, Angelica said, her voice quieter than usual. It's a test of emotional connection. To pass, we have to be completely honest with each other. No secrets, no holding back. Rufus frowned. That doesn't sound so bad. Angelica turned to him, her eyes serious. It's not just talking, Rufus. The room will reject. Our emotions, memories, and fears, whatever we try to hide, will be out there for everyone to see. Rufus blinked, the weight of her words sinking in, so no pressure. Then she managed a faint smile. Exactly. Rufus hesitated, but Angelica reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm, grounding. We can do this, she said, her voice steady. Just trust me. He nodded, allowing her to lead him into the center of the room. The floor beneath them lit up with intricate patterns, and a soft hum filled the air as the trial began. He was 8 years old, standing in the middle of a crowded playground. A group of kids surrounded him, laughing and pointing at the small model spaceship he brought from home. Look at the nerd, one of them, Jared, snatching the spaceship from his hands and smashing it against the ground. The memory dissolved, and Rufus found himself staring at Angelica, his cheeks burning. Why is that what it shows? He asked, his voice tight. Angelica's expression softened. It's showing what's inside you, your fears, your pain. It's part of the trial. Before Rufus could respond, the mist shifted again, this time forming an image of Angelica. She was younger, her skin less vibrant, standing in the shadow of an imposing Xenon woman. The woman's voice was sharper, words laced with disdain. You'll never amount to anything, Angelica. You're too reckless, too impulsive. No one will take you seriously. The younger Angelica flinched but said nothing. Her head bowed. The image faded, and Angelica crossed her arms tightly over her chest. Well, that's embarrassing, she muttered, avoiding Rufus's gaze. Hey, Rufus said gently, reckless and impulsive. That's what got us through the last 2 trials. Angelica glanced up at him, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. But the mist wasn't done with them. Yet it shifted again, this time showing Rufus standing in a sterile white room. He was older, wearing a crisp uniform and holding a datapad. The holographic words on the screen were sharp and unforgiving. Mission terminated, redundant personnel dismissed. The memory hit Rufus like a punch to the gut. He'd been part of a research team working tirelessly on a project he poured his heart into, only to be let go when funding dried up. He'd spent months after that drifting, unsure of his place in the galaxy. Angelica reached out, resting a hand on his arm. That wasn't your fault, she said quietly. They didn't deserve you. Rufus swallowed hard, forcing himself to nod thanks. The mist swirled faster now, the images coming in rapid succession. Moments of joy, pain, fear, and hope flickered around them, each one peeling back another layer of their defenses. Rufus saw glimpses of Angelica's life, a lonely childhood, a series of failed ventures, and a fierce determination to prove herself in turn. She saw Rufus's struggles to find purpose, his fear of being unwanted, and the quiet hope that had brought him to the Galactic Festival in the first place. Finally, the mist began to settle, and the room fell silent. Rufus and Angelica stood facing each other, the weight of everything they'd seen hanging between them. Well, Rufus said, his voice hoarse. That was intense. Angelica let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, you're telling me? The counselors stepped forward, their expressions unreadable. The trial is complete, one of them announced. Your bond has been tested and found true. Rufus blinked, the words taking a moment to register. Wait, what true? What does that mean? It means your connection is genuine, the counselor said. You may leave now as bondmates. Angelica's mouth fell open. But we were trying to prove we weren't compatible. Compatibility is not determined by intent, another counselor said. It is determined by the strength of your bond, which has been demonstrated to be unbreakable. Angelica groaned, rubbing her temples. So that's it, we're stuck together. The counselors exchanged amused glances. That is correct, Rufus sighed, running a hand through his hair. Well, that's unexpected. As they left the chamber, Angelica was unusually quiet, her usual confidence replaced by something more subdued. Rufus glanced at her, unsure of what to say. Hey, he began, for what it's worth, I don't think this is the worst thing that could have happened. Angelica stopped, turning to him with a raised eyebrow. Oh, and what's the worst thing? I don't know, Rufus said with a faint smile. Dying alone on some backwater planet, getting eaten by a space worm. At least this way I've got someone watching my back. Angelica studied him for a moment, then shook her head with a laugh. You're a strange one, Rufus, but maybe you're right. They continued walking, the tension between them easing slightly as they stepped out of the council hall and into the bright Xinan sunlight. Rufus couldn't help but feel a small spark of optimism. Sure, he hadn't planned on getting married to an alien girl at a festival, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the worst mistake he'd ever made. Rufus and Angelica strolled through the bustling Xinan streets, their steps slow as the gravity of their new reality sank in around them. The vibrant colors and sounds of the Galactic Festival seemed to mock the turmoil swirling in Rufus's mind. So what now? Rufus finally asked, breaking the silence. He stuffed his hands into his pockets and looked at Angelica, who was busy scanning the crowd with a frown. Now, Angelica said, we figure out how to make this work. The council's verdict is final, which means we're stuck together, whether we like it or not. Rufus raised an eyebrow. You sound like you're planning an interstellar hostage situation. Make the best of it, Rufus repeated, his tone skeptical. Sure, why not? It's not like I've got anything better to do than navigate married life with a stranger. Angelica stopped in her tracks and turned to face him, hands on her hips. Listen, Earthling, I didn't plan for this any more than you did. But if we're going to be bound together, we might as well try to enjoy it. Rufus hesitated, then sighed. Fine, where do we start? Angelica's grin returned sly and mischievous. By celebrating, of course. Celebrating, Rufus echoed, incredulous. We just found out we're stuck in a lifelong bond. What exactly are we celebrating? The fact that we survived the trials, Angelica said, already dragging toward a nearby vendor. That's no small feat. You know, the vendor's stall was piled high with an assortment of glittering treats, each one more alien and bizarre than the last. Angelica grabbed a handful of what looked like sparkling jelly cubes and handed them to Rufus. Here, try these. Rufus eyed the cubes wearily. What are they? Relax, Angelica said with a laugh. They're harmless, mostly, Rufus repeated, but Angelica popped one into her mouth and gave him an exaggerated thumbs up. Sighing, he followed suit, his taste buds immediately assaulted by a combination of sweetness and a strange fizzy sensation. Not bad, he admitted, though the texture was slightly unnerving. Told you, Angelica said, grabbing more cubes for herself. Come on, let's keep moving. There's a fireworks display later, and I want to find a good spot to watch. As they wandered through the festival, Rufus couldn't help but notice the way Angelica seemed to light up at every new stall or performance they passed. Despite the absurdity of their situation, her enthusiasm was infectious, and he found himself relaxing, even enjoying the experience. Eventually, they reached a wide plaza where a crowd was already gathering. The air buzzed with anticipation as the sky above them began to darken, the twin suns dipping below the horizon. Angelica pulled Rufus toward a raised platform at the edge of the plaza, giving them a clear view of the impending display. Not a bad view, Rufus said, glancing around. The festival lights twinkled like stars, and the distant hum of music created an oddly soothing backdrop. Told you I know all the best spots, Angelica said, leaning against the railing. So Rufus, tell me something. What brought you to the Galactic Festival in the first place? Rufus hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I guess I wanted an adventure, he said after a moment. Something different. I spent most of my life playing it safe, and it wasn't working for me. Angelica tilted her head, her golden eyes curious. Safe doesn't sound so bad. It's not, Rufus said, until you realize you're stuck in a rut. I wanted to see what else was out there, you know, experience the galaxy, meet new people. Angelica smirked. Well, mission accomplished. You've certainly met someone new. Rufus laughed despite himself. Yeah, I guess I did. Angelica shrugged, her expression turning thoughtful. I've always loved it here, the energy, the chaos, the way everyone comes together. It's like anything's possible. Plus, it's a great place to start over. Start over? Rufus asked, his curiosity piqued. Angelica hesitated, then sighed. Let's just say I've made some questionable choices in the past. The festival is a chance to leave all that behind and try something new. Rufus nodded, sensing that there was more to the story, but deciding not to press. Well, for what it's worth, you don't seem so bad to me. Angelica snorted. Thanks, Earth. That means a lot. Before Rufus could respond, the first firework exploded overhead, a burst of light and color that painted the sky in vivid hues. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Angelica's face lit up with childlike delight. Rufus found himself watching her more than the fireworks, captivated by the way her skin shimmered in the multicolored light for the first time since their accidental bonding. He felt a flicker of something that wasn't frustration or exasperation. Maybe Angelica was right, maybe they could make the best of this. As the fireworks continued, Angelica turned to him, her expression softer than he'd ever seen it. "Thanks for sticking with me today, Rufus. I know this isn't what either of us wanted, but I'm glad you're here." Rufus blinked, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "Yeah," he said, his own voice quiet. "Me too." They stood in companionable silence as the final fireworks lit up the sky, their colors reflected in Angelica's shimmering skin. For a moment, Rufus allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't such a bad adventure after all. When the display ended and the crowd began to disperse, Angelica turned to him with a mischievous grin. "So ready for the next part of our grand bonding adventure?" Rufus raised an eyebrow. "Do I have a choice?" "Not really," she said, laughing, "but trust me, Earthling, this is just the beginning." As they made their way back through the festival, Rufus couldn't help but smile. He still didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: life with Angelica was never going to be boring. The next morning, Rufus awoke to the smell of something suspiciously pungent wafting through the pod they were staying in. He groaned, rubbing his eyes and wondering briefly if Angelica had set something on fire again. "Breakfast is served," Angelica announced, her voice chipper as she bounded into the room with a tray of colorful steaming dishes. "You're going to love this." Rufus sat up, eyeing the tray with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "What is it?" "Local delicacies," Angelica said, setting the tray on the small table in the corner of the room. "I thought it'd be a good idea to give you the full Zenith Thean experience." Rufus leaned forward, inspecting the dishes. One looked like a wriggling pile of glowing worms. Another was a gelatinous cube that shimmered with an iridescent sheen, and the third appeared to be a stack of pancakes. "If pancakes were green and sprouted tiny tendrils, is it supposed to move?" Rufus asked, pointing at the glowing worms. Angelica laughed, "Only a little. They're harmless, I promise." "Who?" Rufus said, but he reluctantly picked up a fork and speared one of the glowing creatures. It wriggled slightly, and he grimaced as he popped it into his mouth. The taste was surprisingly pleasant, spicy and tangy with a hint of sweetness. "Not bad," he admitted, though he quickly reached for the water to wash it down. "Told you," Angelica said, grinning as she dug into the gelatinous cube. "You've got to trust me more, Earthling." Rufus rolled his eyes, but couldn't help smiling. "So what's on the agenda for today?" "More bonding activities." "Sort of," Angelica said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "I was thinking we should take a look at the Council's archives. If we're going to figure out how to make this bond work or undo it, we need to know more about how it actually works." Rufus frowned. "And they're just going to let us waltz into their archives and start digging?" Angelica's grin turned mischievous. "Not exactly, but I got a plan." "Why does that not make me feel better?" Rufus muttered, finishing off one of the green pancakes. Angelica didn't answer. Instead, motioning for him to follow her, they left the pod and made their way toward the council hall, which was quieter than it had been the day before. Most of the festival goers were still recovering from the previous night celebrations, and the streets were unusually empty. When they reached the hall, Angelica led Rufus around to a side entrance. Her movements quick and practiced. She pressed a hand to a small panel on the wall, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. "How did you?" Rufus began, but Angelica held up a hand to silence him. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to," she said, winking. "Come on." Rufus followed her inside, his nerves prickling as they navigated the dimly lit corridors. Angelica moved with purpose, clearly familiar with the layout of the building, and Rufus couldn't help but wonder just how many times she'd done something like this before. They reached a large circular room filled with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, each one packed with glowing tablets and scrolls. Angelica let out a low whistle, her eyes scanning the room. "Impressive, isn't it?" she said. "The council keeps records of everything: laws, traditions, rituals. If there's a way to understand this bond, it'll be in here." "Great," Rufus said, eyeing the endless rows of shelves. "Where do we start?" Angelica grabbed a tablet from a nearby shelf and handed it to him. "Start with this. Look for anything about bonding rights, compatibility trials, or I don't know, ways to nullify accidental marriages." Rufus sighed, but nodded, settling into a chair as he began to skim through the tablet. The text was written in a language he didn't understand, but the tablet helpfully translated it into Earth standard. Most of it was dry legal jargon, but he pressed on, determined to find something useful. Angelica worked beside him, her expression unusually focused as she flipped through a stack of scrolls. For a while they worked in silence, the only sound the faint hum of the glowing tablets. "Got something?" Angelica said, suddenly breaking the silence. She held up a scroll, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "It says here that the bond isn't just a legal contract, it's a spiritual connection. It links two people on a deeper level, meant to bring out the best in both of them." Rufus raised an eyebrow. "That's surprisingly poetic." "Yeah. But here's the kicker," Angelica continued, her grin widening. "The bond adapts to the individuals involved. It's not set in stone. It grows and changes with the people it connects." Rufus frowned, trying to wrap his head around the concept. "So, what does that mean for us?" "It means we're not doomed to follow some ancient script, and Angelica said we can make this bond what we want it to be." Rufus leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "That's kind of reassuring, I guess. But it also sounds like a lot of responsibility." Angelica shrugged. "Life's full of responsibilities, Earthling. This one just happens to be a little weirder than most." Before Rufus could respond, a loud chime echoed through the room, and they both froze. The door to the archive slid open, and the